Hello and welcome to the Core Advantage podcast. My name's Darren McInnes.
And I'm Jacob Tober.
On the podcast, we talk about all things sports science, strength and conditioning, and athletic development.
You'll find links, show notes, and references in the podcast details and also on our website.
Okay, welcome to episode 164 of the Random Thoughts Show. We're joined by a very special guest today, Dr Dom Condo. Dom is a nutritional all-rounder and superstar. She is the nutritionist for Geelong Football Club, AFL and Women's AFL, player development manager with the Women's AFL as well. She works with the Deakin Melbourne Boomers. She is the Vice President of Sports Dietetics Australia and runs sports nutrition at Deakin University. Dom, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Aaron. So great to chat to you again. Exciting.
Great to have you. You're now our most frequent guest of all time because this is the third.
That's exciting. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Do love our chats. So good. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Now you're constantly. My experience of you is you're constantly acquiring new roles because everyone wants you to do stuff. Is that all the roles at the moment? I should also mention you're an in-house nutritionist at Core Advantage as well. So that's another.
Yep, absolutely. No, I think you cover them all pretty well.
Oh,
so
good.
yes, I'm at capacity. That's all I'm doing at the moment. So
do not offer her any more work to these people. She's very busy. Look, I'm super appreciative that you could squeeze us in because I know there's a lot going on for you. You're up in the bubble.
Up in the bubble
with the Cats. Tell us all about that. It's such an interesting season to be working in elite sport. What's the bubble been like?
Oh, it's extremely surreal, to be honest. It's been 3.5 months now. So we hit the road on the 5th of July. So it's been a whirlwind. It feels sort of like we left yesterday, but at the same time, it feels like we've been on the road forever. It's really strange. But no, it's been an amazing experience. I think, just being able to have access to the players the way that we do and just almost pretty much living with them. It's opened up opportunities to be able to get to know everybody better, to build, even greater relationships than what we already had. And I think that then just takes, things to a different level with how you can help them because you can actually see what they do day to day, which is really interesting. So in that way, it's been an amazing experience. And I think what we've learned, what everyone's learned about each other, actually, we'd never choose to probably live with your work colleagues for a quarter of the year. But I think, after this, when we hopefully one day get back to some sort of normality, just those relationships that you build will be really beneficial for the work that we do back home. So it's been a pretty amazing experience. I think Harry Taylor mentioned today that it was our 36th COVID test this morning. So,
wow.
Lots of COVID testing.
And that's up the nose with the
up the nose, down the throat. It's been pretty amazing experience.
Now everyone has different. Some people have the layout of their nose is such that it doesn't hurt at all, and some people are in agony. What are you like? Are you okay, or is it?
I'm okay now, but I must say they've changed things significantly from when we first started. So which is interesting. You just think, so why was it the way it was back then? But 5 months ago when we started getting testing done, back in April, it was horrific to the point that you would cry when you walked out of there. It was so bad. And I had some conversations with the testers and they were saying that they actually had to go, like the protocol was to go 5 centimetres up the nostril.
Sounds like a long way.
It's a long way for someone my size. That's this far. It felt like it was in your brain. And then they slowly changed it because they actually had numerous complaints of nosebleeds and all that sort of jazz. And so now it literally is like 2 seconds and that's all. So you think, okay, that's unusual. So no, it's definitely a lot better now. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I'd like to. That's really interesting about the being close and personal, getting to know the players. What were the things? And I had a similar experience when I was once on a travelling party with a national basketball team. And suddenly you see what they're doing, not just at training, but you see the whole, you see 16 hours of their behaviour, not 3 hours. What were some of the things that you noticed that were different to what you might have expected? I know you got to be a little careful you don't give away too much. But
absolutely. Probably a bit more chocolate than I ever thought. Especially when we were in, because we've been, so just our path, I guess, we went Melbourne to Sydney, and then we quarantined in Perth for a couple of weeks, hotel quarantined, and then Queensland, and then we've been to Adelaide a couple of times, but our base has been in Queensland. So in that 2-week quarantine in Perth, when we weren't allowed out of the hotel, a lot of deliveries from supermarket deliveries came, and I really was quite shocked with the amount of chocolate that was coming in for elite athletes. So that was really interesting. To be honest, I actually thought that there might be a little bit more alcohol happening here and there, but they've actually been very good in that respect. We've as a club had a couple of nights where we've supplied a little bit of alcohol after when we've had a longer break or whatever, as just a bit of a celebration of what we're doing. Nothing crazy, but besides that, the boys have been extremely impressive in that respect. So to be honest, if anything, it's probably been the other way around, that I've actually been able to see just how they manage themselves, and they're in bed pretty early. The place, well, what we see anyway, the place is pretty quiet, pretty early. They're really great with their routines around eating. So if anything, it's been like, wow, they've got some pretty good routines happening. It's just the chocolate piece that I thought, wow, we could actually send a supermarket out of chocolate the amount we're going through. But that's about it. Yeah.
Do you reckon that sometimes you eat more chocolate as comfort food? Like I've just for myself, I've eaten more chocolate in 2020 than ever before. Yeah, because I feel like you're reaching. Do you reckon that's probably a little anomalous as well?
I think that's got something to do, and I'm with you. I mean, personally, I'm not.
Oh, you've muted yourself. You got so excited you muted yourself.
Sorry. I'm not a chocolate eater at the best of times. It's not like I would rather chips and chocolate. I'm just more,
I'm kind of the same mostly,
Yeah, and I have been eating a fair bit of chocolate. So, I think that probably has something to do with it as well. And I just think, and the boys are pretty honest. If you ask them, they eat chocolate at home. And I think that's the difference, is that what is important to remember in these situations, it's different to travelling for games. When you travel for a game and you travel for 2 days, then you can control a bit more what the athletes do, and you don't expect to see a whole bunch of crappy food everywhere, because you're preparing for a game and it's literally 2 days. But you just can't expect to live like that for 3.5 months. I mean, everyone is human, and so I think it's really important to understand that we can only control so much, and you also need to feel like you're living normally as well. And if that's what they do, and if you ask them, they probably do consume a fair bit at home that we just never see. So as long as they're performing well, and from our perspective that their body comp is in check, then if that's what they enjoy to do, then so be it.
Now, Dom, you are in addition to nutrition, you have a bit of a passion around sleep stuff. With the chocolate, is it one of those things we should try and, we probably shouldn't have caffeine after a certain time of day?
Exactly.
Usually people say around 1 or 2 o'clock. Is that what you tend to think?
Yeah. And it will vary for different people, but essentially, I mean, you have to think that caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. So ideally you'd be going to bed without caffeine in your system. So if you work back from that, then you'd be wanting to say after lunchtime, you would ideally not be having caffeine.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but chocolate has a bit of caffeine in it as well, a little bit?
It does. It's not huge, but it definitely does. And so, you do need to be careful, especially people that might be a little bit more sensitive to caffeine or not as tolerant, however you might want it to see it, that it can impact potentially. I guess, my interest is thinking about how food impacts sleep and in more in the athletic population. And we really don't know much at all about that, which is where a lot of our research is focused on at the moment. And there are a few different thoughts that actually having higher GI and higher sugar in the evening time can potentially help with sleep in some populations,
Really?
whereas others has been shown that it's detrimental. So we're still really learning and I'm trying to understand the mechanisms, and it probably has something to do with insulin spikes and what that effect actually then happens, and then thinking, well, it's not just sleep quantity but also sleep quality as well, and how that's impacted. But from a caffeine perspective, if you go and have a block of chocolate in the hour before bed, then you are going to get some caffeine in your system.
Okay.
You're also going to get a big hit of fat and a big hit of sugar, and potentially can impact sleep.
You open up so many things I want to ask you about. In terms of the sleep stuff, I wish we could just bottle whatever it is that I get about 45 minutes after lunch.
Yeah.
That would be a great sleeping pill.
Yeah. Well, what are you eating at lunch? So you think about that, and then
just to replicate. Yeah, but it seems to be similar. It seems to me to be similar stuff, but there's just something about post-lunch sleepiness.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, and it may have something to do with what you're eating at lunch. It also could have something to do with the time of day as well, and just thinking about your circadian rhythms and what's happening there. We do hit a bit of a lump at that time, but also everyone's a little bit different with when they actually have, like, what their sleep was like the night before, what time they actually got up, and when when they may feel that bit of a slump. But it definitely can have something to do with the sort of food that you eat at lunch. And I guess, and to be honest, there's not a whole lot of evidence behind this thought, but the thought often is that having a higher carbohydrate intake at lunch is when people often then feel that bit of fatigue afterwards, rather than having a lunch that's, say, higher in proteins. So it varies, and I think what we don't understand is how it varies between individuals and what factors actually contribute to that effect as well. So it's an area I'm so interested in, and again, that's where a lot of my research is focused on at the moment, and hopefully continues to be.
That's such an important area, I think, too, for life and performance. I look forward to getting more updates as more comes to light.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dr. Peter Attia is an interesting thinker, is a sort of proactive medicine specialist out of the States. And I listened to a podcast a while ago with him talking about how the two biggest things that he's most attached to are his Oura ring and his continuous glucose monitoring. His I think it's his G7 that he has embedded that monitors his glucose. I want to ask you about both those things because I'm fascinated by them. You have an Oura ring.
I do. So
tell us about that.
Wearing it at the moment.
Looks so cool. What colour is that one?
So this is meant to be like a charcoal, but I wear it when I train, and so it's faded. It's gone a bit silverish, but it should be like a black. So we actually pronounce it Aura, but I guess you can say it anyway.
I'm saying no. It's my bad. Thank you, Aura.
Aura, yep. It's very much like a Fitbit, I guess, activity tracker, you could say, but it's validated specifically for sleep and also for heart rate variability as well. So, it through accelerometry, so it looks at your movements, it looks at your heart rate, it looks at your breathing rate, and based on that, it has particular algorithms which can tell you when you're sleeping, and gives you all of that data. So when you go to sleep, when you wake, it also tells you information about your sleep stages, so your deep sleep versus just your light sleep, your REM sleep. However, we do need to be really careful about that information and how much we actually rely on the sleep stages. You really can't get accurate information unless you are in polysomnography, which is where you lay on the bed with all the electrodes. That will tell you what your sleep stages are, but at least it tells you your trends, and you may start to understand at what nights you're sleeping, you get more deep sleep compared to others, and what factors may influence that. So
is it making really good guess? So it's making better guesses than other devices, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. From that respect, from sleep stages, I tend to notice. So, I mean, subjectively, when I have when I feel better, I've noticed that I get more deep sleep on my Aura ring. So
there's a correlation.
There's a correlation there, in my opinion. It has been validated for total sleep, and for some of your other sleep quality measures, like your wake after sleep onset, so how many times you wake up in a night, your sleep latency, how long it takes you to fall asleep, those sorts of things. So you get some really great information on that. It also, as I said, gives you information about your resting heart rate overnight, your heart rate variability, your breathing rate, and also your step count and all your activity.
What does yours get down to overnight? You're pretty fit.
My heart rate?
Yeah.
It sits at around 40 to 45.
Oh, that's impressive. That's really cool.
So and you notice when it's elevated, you can sort of start to understand why. After a couple of wines, it definitely goes up a bit the next morning. Or if you've exercised late, I find that sort of increases it a bit as well. So
I use my Apple Watch, but I'm not very happy with it because I just don't think the wrist-based heart rate is accurate enough.
No, I agree.
It's a very blunt instrument.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess you got to think with the Apple, you're then using your apps to be able to, and so it will then depend on the quality of the app as well. So all those things come into it. But there's some really interesting. I mean, if you Google Aura Ring, they're using it in the NBA at the moment in their hub in Disneyland, and they're actually saying there's some big studies happening at the moment where they're looking at the correlation with COVID as well, and starting to see some of the trends that you get from your Aura data and how it can actually predict someone that is, that has the virus, and can almost see it earlier by some of the changes in things that are happening, like your core body temperature going up a few days before and that type of thing.
That's so interesting, isn't it?
It's really interesting, and the data isn't there yet, but their preliminary data is showing some really good correlations, and they're currently undergoing a pretty big study looking at that. So it is really interesting, because what we know is days prior to infection, your body, when you've already got it, but your body's slowly starting to fight that, and so you start to see some changes, and so you can potentially predict when that's going to happen.
So one of the biggest problems with things like COVID and just this stuff in general is that you are asymptomatic. You're actually spreading the virus before the symptoms hit. And so by the time the symptoms hit, it's too late in that sense. Does this have the potential to maybe have a point one day where it tells you, warning, you might be about to get sick, and therefore you could actually quarantine before you started infecting people?
That's the thought.
Pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I don't know how valid that thought is, but again, there's a fair bit going into that from a research perspective at the moment, with a couple of different tools. With the Aura Ring, there's also the Whoop bands that are doing a similar thing with their studies. So if these things can predict any of that and can help the situation, then that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
So cool. Now, have you bought that off your own bat, or is that something that Geelong is doing, the Aura Rings?
So all players, all players that want one, they can obviously opt out. We don't force it on them, but they've all had it for the last season.
Cool.
And same with AFLW players as well. So it's actually been really interesting. What I plan to do is actually look at some of the data through this hub period and compared, to pre-hub during hub and look at how some of those sleep measures have actually changed over that time
So
as
interesting.
well, which I think is really interesting. But it gives us good information on recovery and coping, really. And from an athlete perspective, it's not to say you can't play because you haven't slept well for 3 days or something like that, but you can start to say, well, if you see changes in heart rate variability, if you see someone that hasn't slept well for a week, potentially their training loads can be modified to make sure that you're not overtraining and that you're actually taking that into consideration so they can be as fresh as they need to once competition comes. So just getting that extra information on athletes, I think, is a great thing if we've got the technology to do it.
That's pretty cool. I use auto sleep on my watch, which is I think the least worst in a lot of respects from a watch base. It has a composite of my waking heart rate and my HRV, and it mixes those two things together to give me a readiness score.
Yep.
Because I found that HRV alone was basically, if I listened to HRV, I would never train.
Yeah.
Like, it was too sensitive.
Yeah.
Was my personal experience with it.
Yeah.
What are your, and so for instance, this morning it gave me a rating of 5 stars. So it's telling me, get out and train like a monster. You're good to go.
Yeah.
But some days it'll give me a rating of 1 star. What are your thoughts about HRV all by itself? Do you think a composite thing is better? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think firstly you need to have a really good baseline, so you need to at least be monitoring for 3 or 4 weeks to really understand what your baseline HRV is, and because it can fluctuate. So you almost want an average. And that's what something like this Aura data does. It gives you an average once you've had a couple of weeks of data so that you can actually base changes on that, because if you just start using it, you actually need to understand what your norm is. We've got some athletes who their HRV at baseline is really high, whereas others is actually quite low, but that's their normal. So I wouldn't be overly concerned of someone that's really low if they're normally low, but if someone is, upwards of 100 and then they're dropping, that's when you can have some concerns. So that's what you just have to sort of think about. I think with the readiness, you just have to be really careful about what the algorithm is, because it's, there are some readiness measures that some of the devices give you that do use good factors, and they can give you a pretty accurate assessment of if you're ready or not, whereas others, like as an example, the Aura, I would tell players not to worry too much about the readiness, because it actually takes into account their algorithm is all around the activity that you do in a day. So it takes the activity tracking information around your steps and your total calories and whatnot, and it puts that into the algorithm along with your HRV, along with some of your sleep measures. And the thing is, a lot of the players aren't wearing their rings at all during the day. We really ask them to put it on at night. So because of that, it's almost missing a key part of that algorithm, and the readiness is a little bit skewed.
Well, because they're not going to be able to wear it when they train.
No.
Not going to be able to wear it when they lift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're an athlete that's actually training at high intensities, the activity tracking is not accurate whatsoever. And we know that from all the data. If you're walking and you're doing more, moderate exercise, and it can be a good indication, but anyone that does intense exercise or even lifting and whatnot is not actually a true indication of how many calories or you're burning in a day, or how many steps you've actually taken. So when the readiness algorithm takes that into consideration, you do have to be a little bit careful.
Good to know. Good tips. Okay. Yeah, such an interesting area, that whole
fascinating space. Isn't
it? Now, Dom, this year obviously presented unique challenges in terms of getting the players ready off a short turnaround, the lowest base of fitness you've ever had. I'm really curious. I think it's a really interesting question about the wider community in Melbourne, at least in Victoria, is looking down the barrel of a reload into sport coming along soon. Were there different things you did nutritionally to support that more rapid than you would normally like, ramping back up into full load? What were some of the things you might have done, if any?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think you are so right. It was something that we've never seen in footy before. With the short turnarounds in particular, playing every 4 or 5 days was just incredible to see, and the way that the boys did that, it's a credit to them. Absolutely fascinating. But I think, firstly, it's just around, and I know this sounds probably a little bit boring, but really getting back to the basics, because I guess we assume that everyone's doing the basics, but the reality is they're not always. So it was actually really about saying, okay, we need to be having really good quality meals and snacks regularly all day, every day. And there's, you don't have the, I guess, flexibility to have a day off of eating well, because you're constantly in either recovery or preparing for competition, really. So it was really, and that's what's been so great here in the hub, is that we can control that, and we can control all the food that's provided. We're very fortunate to be able to do that with AFL, and so
that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes such a difference. And so actually making sure that there is, the right type of nutrients, the carbs, the proteins, the fats, the veggies coming in regularly, and getting the timing right around, their training and games. That was number one. And I think that helped a lot. Then when we go to the extra steps of, okay, well, what supplementation can we use to help support this? I guess here, from when we started in the hub, when all the short turnarounds sort of kicked off, every morning I'll put out, which reminds me I have to do that this morning. I'll put out collagen shots. So collagen mixed with vitamin C powder and orange juice. So we blend all that together, which is really great. Collagen is really great from a joint recovery tendon perspective. We also put out fish oils as an anti-inflammatory, probiotics. Probiotics are really important for gut health, and we still don't know everything about the gut, but really starting to understand how important gut health is from an immune perspective as well, and also mental health. So that's important. And then we do magnesium powder in the evening time. So that's sort of the general supplementation that's been happening across the board. And then we've got other bits and pieces that players do individually. Yeah, that might be specific for their own individual needs. But I guess we haven't done that before on that level where it's been, rolled out in their face every day.
Yeah.
And that's just, you think, oh, well, if I have it out there, they should do it themselves. But yeah, it's better just to do it. And then they just come and take their vitamins and their shots. So that's been happening.
Do you know, with the collagen, for a couple of weeks, I ran out of collagen. And because ever since you told me about it a couple of years ago, I've been religious with it. And what I noticed is my fingernails went back to their normal, because when I'm on collagen, I have to cut my fingernails every 6 days.
Yeah.
Like they just grow so fast.
Yeah, they do. Fingers, hair, good for the skin.
I wouldn't know about the hair, but yeah.
No, it is
really
great.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and again, we're learning more about collagen even from an injury prevention perspective, but definitely we know the benefits from a recovery. It essentially is just, adds to the protein piece. Obviously, lots of protein powder that we're flying through. We've got a smoothie station set up here with, protein and creatine and all your different, fruits and milks and whatnot, and that just continuous. The boys would go in between meals and snacks and get that in. So, yeah.
That's great. Just quick curiosity question. Is there any difference in the different types of? There's lots of different marketing around different types of collagen these days. And there's
Yeah.
hydrolyzed, there's non-hydrolyzed. In terms of the joint health perspective, is there a difference between hydrolyzed and non-hydrolyzed, or are they all equally beneficial?
Nah, equally beneficial. I guess you got to think if it's non-hydrolyzed, you're essentially it's almost like a gelatin, and so it can be quite difficult to mix, and that's a common mistake. So when it's hydrolyzed, it's almost becomes like a powder more so, and you can mix it into anything. Whereas if it's not, then you just it sort of changes exactly what you can how you can prepare it. And I've made that mistake when we first started this, and I think I've told you that story many years ago, 3 or so years ago, when you get your gelatin and it forms a gel and it just doesn't work in smoothies. So that's that. And what you'll see now, the commercial, I guess the ones that you can buy off your shelves and the powder are going to be more your hydrolyzed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I take the non-hydrolyzed and I have to be really careful to drink it straight away because you have to put boiling water because otherwise I come back and it's like jelly but not in a good way. Like it's
horrible.
Disgusting.
The texture is disgusting.
So bad.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. But it's not. So the form is not so much the question. I guess it's the dose that you're wanting to get in the right dose as well, which we are learning more about. But it still seems to be around that 15-gram mark. That's the right dose to get in.
And because science moves so fast with this kind of cutting edge stuff, when last you and I talked about it, you were very much about it as a pre-training, pre-game thing.
Yeah.
Is that still where you're sitting in terms of timing?
Yeah, it's still where we're sitting. Unless, as far as an injury protocol goes, if someone's in rehab, then I'd be suggesting that they're having it regularly over the day. So it's 3 times a day at that dose. Otherwise, it's more ideally, it'd be about an hour before the training. That's more just from a, I guess, injury prevention perspective. But there is a lot more research coming out. A friend of mine has just actually finished her PhD in this area, so all of her papers are about to be published soon, I'm sure. So we're starting to learn a lot more from it, and in research that will come from Australia as well, which is great.
That's cool. I love it. That's great. Now, just last follow up on this area. Are you still doing pickle juice as a cramp prevention thing? Is that still the cramp preventer?
Yeah. So I guess it's not so much the prevention, it's more once you start feeling the cramp is when you take the pickle juice. So players that we know struggle with cramping or more prone to it, we just make sure, and we all know that cramping is a bit of a mystery. There's so many factors that could impact on cramping, but we just tick off the nutrition box, which is making sure that their hydration is adequate, enough water, enough electrolytes, magnesium, dose on higher levels of magnesium leading into competition, and then have pickle juice on hand for if they start to feel a cramp, they get that in. Swirl it around the mouth is key, and either swallow or spit it out.
Why do you swirl it around the mouth? What's the benefit you're getting there?
Well, it's all working in those mouth receptors, and I guess that's the way that the mechanism that we think is happening.
Tell us about that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's a neurological sort of mechanism rather than working in the gut. So I guess what we know is that the cramping of muscles is sort of the neurons firing, and so when you get this pickle juice, it's the sort of it's a bit of a shock to the system, purely more so because of the taste, and because of that, it sort of changes the path of those firing of the neurons and releases the muscle cramp. That's what the thought is.
It's almost like just the shock of that sharp flavour.
Exactly. Yeah.
So does that mean you could be achieving with that? If you're thinking about it in terms of first principles, that you could be achieving a similar result with different substances?
Yep.
It's just it's not so much the pickliness of the juice as the shockiness of the pickliness.
No, and that's why there's so many different different ones that have come out now. So as an example, there's one called Hot Shots. There's a few others, and they're all similar in that they've just got a very unique, sharp taste. Some are based on chili, some are based on the vinegar. So it's when you swirl it around and then,
and so that shock is distracting your body from the cramp, kind of?
Pretty much, if you think of it in that way, yeah. So it almost change. That's the thought, is that it then that shock will then change that the firing of the neurons, change that pathway, and then releases the muscle cramp. Doesn't always work for everybody, and I think what I found is that the key is when you actually the timing that you get it. So if you get it early, then it has more chance of working rather than letting the cramps become quite significant. Some players, and we all know cramping can be horrific. Even a toe cramp can be painful.
Oh, yeah, horrible.
And so some players, and we've been pretty lucky here, they've actually got a lot of it under control, but can be in full body muscle cramps. And it's not going to help once you get to that level.
It's too far gone.
Too far gone. But yeah, we definitely have been going through a fair bit of pickle juice in this weather.
As a percentage, like what percentage of the team would get? Is it 5% of players get susceptible to cramps? Like
at this stage of the season, I mean, early pre-season, it's a lot. If we think back to being back in Victorian summer, when they're first back in the first couple of games, we see it a lot more. But now I think, there's however many players, 22 players. There's probably about 3 or 4 of them that would have pickle juice over a game.
Okay. And last question on the cramps. What, if any, is the relationship between someone who's been cramping in an area then sustains a strain? Is there any correlation there, or is it just pretty random?
Yeah, I think it's pretty random from what we've looked at here. To be honest, I'm not across all the literature, the evidence around that relationship, but we here in particular haven't seen that correlation.
Not a pattern.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for letting me get into the weeds on that one. It's I find it so interesting.
It's very fascinating.
But I don't want to lose sight of Dom's really key point, which was fundamentals done brutally well. Like it's about the big rocks. It's interesting for us to chat around all the other little bits and pieces, but the big rocks are good nutrition fundamentally. Yeah.
100%. Good carbs, good protein. Don't be scared of carbs. That was the big thing. Like even here, we've had a lot of players that would have gone through periods of, doing some fasting protocols or being on a lot of carb periodization and going quite low carb at certain times of the week, higher carb at other times. The message when we came into short turnarounds was, no more fasting and get the carbs in regularly because you're just always in recovery. So, just think about what your goals are. And if your goals are to perform with the change in what's been happening in your sport, then that's what you have to do, and body comp will sort itself out because you are obviously in shorter turnarounds, so you're going to actually be needing more. So I wouldn't be too concerned around changes in body comp, but eating a bit more carbohydrate to help you perform and recover.
That's so good, Dom. I suppose my next question is, we're in a situation where everyone's going to we're coming out of a period of what arguably the greatest period of inactivity for a lot of people, a lot of athletes, and even though we're all trying to run and lift and move and use body weight and stuff, but in terms of it's the longest amount of time away from the full intensity of sport that most people have ever had. It's a very long time, and over that period, I think it's not uncommon for people's body composition to have slipped in terms of, we may have lost a little bit of muscle, gained a little bit of fat. Like if you've lost a tiny bit of muscle and gained a tiny bit of fat, that's probably a win out of lockdown. Like you've actually done quite well because this is a challenging thing. We're in this weird situation though where as we do the reload, we've got these competing priorities. We kind of want to get lean and put on some muscle at the same time. Which is, a tricky thing to do.
It is.
Do you have any magic tricks that you can tell us about to do that? Like how would you navigate that in broad brushstrokes?
Yeah, it is, and it's always what we want, isn't it? I want to be bigger, but I want to be leaner.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I think anyone that's maintained muscle mass during this time, hats off to you, because it is extremely difficult,
Yeah.
unless you're set up with an amazing home gym, especially in Victoria. I'm talking about it. Yeah, it is a challenge. I think firstly, I mean, what I was just talking about with the, higher carbs and whatnot, we have to remember that it depends on what sort of athlete you are. And I was referring to, elite athletes that are performing, that's the goal. If you're a recreational athlete, person that trains pretty hard, but you're training, I guess, to be in good shape, and your goal is to get a bit leaner, then my advice would be, once you start to get back into the gym, and things get back to normal, hopefully soon, is to plan out what your training week looks like, and to identify the times that you are going to need some more energy to be able to, lift in the gym. Say, if we're just talking about someone that's a strength athlete, and then times of the week when you think you can actually pull back a little bit. Because what you have to remember is that to get leaner or to lose body fat, you essentially need to be in an energy deficit. But to gain size and mass, you actually need to be in an energy surplus. So they're opposites. But if you've actually gained some fat mass over this time, it may be that your goal at the moment is more to maintain your actual mass but get leaner, and so therefore it's going to be more of an overall slight energy deficit, but actually looking at times of the week where you need more energy to be able to lift and therefore get those results that you want. So it's going to be a real periodization of carbohydrates and energy. So eating more energy and more carbs at times that you're training, and pulling back at other times that you may not need it. So that's number one. Secondly is high protein. So what we know now, and there's some new research to back this up, is that athletes require approximately 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilo of protein a day, depending on what sort of athlete they are, which isn't a lot.
But it is going up and up, isn't it? The amount.
It is going up, yeah. But again, that depends on, and the general population that doesn't train is 0.8 to 1 gram per kilo. So we don't need a huge amount of protein in a day for general bodily processes, for tissue recovery, etc. As you obviously use more muscle and more muscle damage, you need more. So that's why athletes need more. But what we know is that when you're in an energy deficit, so when you're trying to potentially lose body fat, and you're training, then protein requirements are increased to maintain muscle mass. So there's some new research to actually show that you need upwards of 2 grams per kilo a day, so around the 2.2 to 2.4 to maintain lean muscle mass whilst losing body fat. So if we then bring that back to what that means, it means that your protein intake needs to remain really quite high, whilst your carbohydrate and energy may be periodizing based on your training. So good quality protein coming in regularly all throughout the day, regardless of your training day, and then changing your carbs and energy to match your training program.
Yeah. And you generally advise that you are eating more carbs the day, like in the lead up to the, if you're having you're having a higher carb day because you're training harder, then you have more carbs prior to that rather than post. Is your general advice? Or
exactly right. So prior to is important to have more carbs for the energy. It depends on what sort of training you're doing. If you're going out for a half marathon distance run, then you're going to need some carbs after for glycogen replenishment. But if you're in the gym, doing more strength based, then your post meal can definitely have some carb in it, but it's not going to be as essential to get that same higher amount if you've done like an endurance based type of exercise.
I find like when I train every morning, and when I run in the morning, and I'm not that, my appetite's pretty normal when I run, but I'm ravenous when I lift.
Yeah.
And I just react because I'm not trying to be totally shredded. I just want to be happy.
Mm,
I
yep.
just react to that, and I tend to eat, I reckon, about 30% more on the days and the time after I've lifted than the time after I've run.
Yeah.
If I was more disciplined, would it be that you would change that up and you try and lift more to prepare to lift, or do you just go, well, your hunger's telling you? Like, do you think listening to your hunger is useful for that? Or
Absolutely, it is your hunger, and I guess it depends. Like, would you eat prior to your strength
No, I'm
sessions?
always training fasted.
Yeah. And that's where, like, I think again it depends on what your goals are. If you were trying to gain lean muscle and size, then I would be but you want to lean down a bit. Your running or your cardio type of exercise you can be fasted for, and then eat after, and because if you don't want to break any records. But if you're actually trying to get some results in the gym, I wouldn't be going in fasted. So you're actually better off eating prior to your gym and then definitely eating after, but you actually might feel like you're not as starving after, so you don't get as much. But, I'd be saying good quality proteins, high good fats after, with then some carbohydrate in there as well. And then say if you're not training, until the next day or whatever, then you can actually start to, reduce the carb intake as the day goes on, keeping up with high protein, good fats, heaps of veggies, that type of thing.
Nice. Cool.
Mm.
Okay. I've had so many interesting notes I've taken. I've gone past my questions. So the next thing I want to talk about is you have an exciting new website. So congrats on it. It's very cool.
Thank you.
What's the address of the website?
So it's Dr_Dom. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Yeah. Pretty much. That's what it is.
Dr_Dom at .com.
Yep. .au. Yep.
We'll put that in the show notes as well, which is really good because it's a way for people to get around a bit of what you're doing and get in touch with it, and it's got a link through to our site as well.
Absolutely. So I obviously do consulting with you guys, and obviously online at the moment with everything happening with COVID, but you can book through my site, or which will direct to your site. We'll obviously book through your site.
And it's been really interesting for me, the Zoom thing, because we've had quite a good uptake of that, and people there's a lot of people that need nutritional advice, but just the time taken to drive somewhere, wait for an appointment, have the appointment, drive back, it becomes it could be a 3-hour time investment when you add it all up.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been really pleasantly surprised by how much people have been getting around the Zoom thing, because we're all used to it now. Like all of a sudden, it just seems perfectly reasonable that you should talk to someone over a screen rather than face to face.
Yep.
And for nutrition, like from a strength and conditioning point of view, we've been doing that as well. We've been having athletes join up from all over the world, and it's been really interesting. People all of a sudden, geography is not a limitation anymore. But it does limit. You have to be honest. It does limit your strength and conditioning a bit, because you can't pick up quite as much as you can, if you're training someone in real life. But with nutrition, you're getting 99% of what you get out of a face-to-face, really, because you're getting to talk to them. They're maybe even better because they're a bit more comfortable in their own house. Maybe tell us about how it's been going.
Yeah, it's actually been going really well. I mean, and even prior to COVID, I always offered an online option, because, like you said, then anyone anywhere in the world can access services. So, I agree. I think with nutrition, there's not a whole lot of practical element to what we do, where we need to be face to face for any, I guess, better quality in service. The only thing that I would do face to face that you obviously can't do through Zoom is body comp assessment, so your skin folds or that type of thing. But besides that, I mean, I think it's been really useful. And like you said, nutrition is one of those things that can be a little bit scary for some people. Talking about weight, talking about goals around what they're eating, it can be a little bit uncomfortable for some, and so I've actually found that I'm getting some better information that I can then use to help my clients better face to face, because you do just feel that bit more comfortable. And sometimes people say that it can be a bit hard to build rapport through Zoom, but I haven't found an issue with it at all. I mean, I'm a pretty I'm never struggle for conversation,
Yeah,
so
you're a gun at that.
you
so
know,
yeah,
always
it's
try and
easy.
make me feel as comfortable as I can.
Yeah.
So no, it's working really well, and it's been great that
Mm.
I can do that whilst being here in the hub
Yeah.
too. So
It's really good. I reckon it's like COVID has a lot of negatives, but it's got a couple of real positives. That disruption of this, the whole sort of telehealth, teleworking disruption that it's forced, where
yeah,
it's now just becoming acceptable that, like my wife's job, she's allowed to work from home quite a few days now because they're like, we're actually getting more done than you were before.
exactly. It's
So
going to change the way we do things. I think even
I think-
post
yeah,
it all. Yeah, definitely.
it's really interesting.
Mm.
Tell me, following on from that with the skin fold stuff, what are your thoughts? Skin fold is kind of apart from sitting in those special pods. Skin fold is this gold standard. Are there other options that are valid? Last time I talked about it to someone, it was still like, the bioimpedance, the scales that put a little bit of a charge through, not really very good.
No.
Is there anything like what if you're ranking them? So you've got what's the top one called? I've forgotten the
DEXA.
name. The DEXA. That's the gold standard. Yeah.
Gold standard, 100%. It's just that we don't have access to DEXAs
a
very often.
$200,000 pod or whatever it is. Yeah.
But that's definitely the gold standard. Yeah.
How do they work? What do they do?
Essentially, you go under. It's almost like, think of it almost like a body scan, I guess.
Yeah, right.
And it gives you what your body fat percentage is, like your fat mass versus your lean mass, and extremely validated. It's the same, and it also does by bone density as well. Same machine essentially. So extremely valid. And it's different to skin folds though. So they're both measuring body composition, but the DEXA again will give you a percentage of your body fat is, whereas a skin fold doesn't do that. A skin fold will give you a sum of almost like the pinch test.
Yep.
And so and the equations which convert that to a body fat percentage, and I'd never use them. I don't think they're overly accurate. Right. So it's just important to understand that they're two very different measures, and they can be both used. We've done DEXA scans with our athletes here before, and I also do skin folds regularly too. Skin folds are obviously something that I can do at any time, so a lot less cost, less burden, so something that you can just use with body weight to measure body composition over time.
And if you don't have access to skin folds, what's the next best thing? Is it something like a waist measurement?
Yeah, your girth measurements. Yeah, definitely. So obviously, like, depending on what sort of athlete you are and what the situation is, the body weight is important to look at changes potentially in body comp. But of course, we have to understand that muscle, as we all know, weighs a fair bit, which is why we wouldn't use BMI, your body mass index for athletes, because they are all obese because they have a lot of muscle mass. But it's just, it seems still important to that can still be used in the picture. But if you want to actually look at changes in body composition and you don't have access to someone that can do skin folds, because they do have to be qualified to be able to do them accurately, then getting your measurement tape measures and doing your waist, hip, your arms measurements, your girth measurements is a really good way.
And is just around the belly button the best way to
I would say if you're doing it by yourself at home, around the belly button is a good indication. So I guess the important thing is that you have to always do the same spot. Because otherwise it's not going to be very accurate. So even from if you're wanting to do look at your arms, biceps, say just making sure, what I often do is you feel your shoulder bone there and then your elbow, and you just measure and get the midway and then measure the midway, so you've always got a consistent point that you're measuring.
Nice. So I think you've covered so much interesting stuff. It was just great to hear about all the hub stuff. What do you think as a final question for Willichair, because I know you're super busy,
No.
what do you think are the biggest changes, the learnings you've made from the hub experience this year into a normal season next season? Are there things that this is going, we're going to do it differently? Because is there a key learning apart from the chocolate?
Apart from the chocolate.
that you've taken away out of this, do you think?
That is such a good question. I think from a nutrition perspective, what I've definitely learned from here again is just that the more we can provide, and the more that we can control around the important point of the important times, the better. And so I guess and even from the players' perspective, I think now that they've seen what it looks like to eat well every meal for I think they'll take a lot from that as well, of how they need to be preparing and cooking at themselves at home. But even just understanding, seeing the way that they that their patterns and the way that they like to eat, we can actually take that back to our chefs back home and start to implement that as best we can and replicate some of those things. Back home we have amazing chefs that provide lunch around training, but actually thinking, well, what can we do a little bit differently in that way to best prepare for their training. And it might be, well, just my thought is that it might actually be better to think around, well, maybe providing like really good breakfast if they're training in the mornings is actually going to be better than providing the lunches, just seeing how what their routines are like. So I think after this we'll have a really good think around what worked well and what we felt helped from a performance perspective, and be able to take that away with us too. But I think the biggest thing for me is just taking away again those conversations that you have with players and staff here, and that you've taken, the relationships have been taken to a new level where I think we just know each other better. That allows us to be able to do our jobs better back home, and it's really hard, it's difficult to put that into words or to quite explain what that means, but I just think having that that respect for each other and really understanding the way each other work and operates will then translate into much better work relationships and work back home as well.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. Well, and hopefully it's a celebratory atmosphere because you're going into finals.
Yes, big game tomorrow. So hopefully we're still around next week.
Yeah. So best of luck to you with that, and we'll see you back down in the gym sometime this year.
We will.
Hopefully.
Absolutely, and take care, everyone back in Victoria. I'm thinking of you all, and hopefully you'll be back in the gym soon.
We'll see you all soon. Okay. Thanks heaps, Dom.
Thanks, Darren. Bye.
And before you go, hear from some of our alumni about our career transforming course, the online mentorship. Learn more about how you can join at our website.
I learnt the theory stuff at uni, but I didn't know how to apply it, and coming to Core Advantage was how I bridged that gap. So I knew the stuff, but I didn't know how to do the stuff. It was something that I needed to do personally for my own development, and it's allowed me to work in elite sport for now 5 years, so it was a massive help.
I think mentorship is really important, and being able to ask questions all the time, and the Core Advantage course allows that because there is a big team of people that you can ask questions.
I get to train professional athletes every week, work really closely with professional athletes, which is awesome. A lot of the skills that I'm applying, I learned through the program at Core Advantage.
It's not just something that you read and then think about and then go, how does that tie into everything? It's something that practical that you can turn around and go, this is exactly how I'm going to apply it. And the concepts that you learn help you as a coach, as a professional, as a person. Yeah, it's awesome. Definitely go and do it.
To sign up for the online mentorship, head to coreadvantage.training/mentorship.